Before we go any further, if you have ever trusted someone completely and later discovered that trust was being used against you, if you have ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused about your own reality, if you have ever given your loyalty to something, a person, a group, an ideology, and felt, slowly, that something was being taken from you that you never agreed to give, this is the video you needed to find. And if Empire of the Mind is the kind of channel that hands you tools instead of just talking points, that helps you think more clearly about your own inner life, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Turn on every notification because we are building something here that the algorithm was not designed for. Now, let's go deep. There is a particular kind of confusion that doesn't feel like confusion. It feels like love. It feels like devotion. It feels like finally being seen by someone who truly understands you. It feels like belonging to something larger than yourself, a relationship, a community, a calling, a cause. And then, slowly, so slowly, you almost miss it. You begin to notice that you are smaller than you were before, that your own thoughts feel less trustworthy, that the distance between who you were and who you are becoming seems to serve someone else's needs far more than your own. That is not love. That is not devotion. That is not a spiritual community. That is manipulation. And Carl Jung gave us one of the most precise and powerful frameworks ever developed for understanding exactly how it works, and more importantly, how to see through it. Jung spent decades studying what he called the dynamics of the unconscious, the invisible psychological forces that drive human behavior beneath the level of rational awareness. And what he discovered, again and again, was this: the most effective manipulation is never experienced as manipulation. It is experienced as truth. The manipulator does not come to you and say, "I am going to use your wounds against you." They come to you and say, "I am the only one who truly understands your wounds." They don't say, "I need your compliance." They say, "I can see your potential, and I need you to trust me to unlock it." They don't say, "I want your power." They say, "I want to give you power," and then quietly, systematically dismantle every source of power you already had. Jung would call this a manipulation of the unconscious. And to understand it fully, we need to look at three of his most essential concepts: the shadow projection, the Anima and Animus possession, and the Trickster Archetype. Because manipulation, true, sophisticated, spiritually dangerous manipulation, operates through all three. Let's begin with shadow projection. Jung taught that every human being carries a shadow, the unconscious repository of everything we've rejected, suppressed, or deemed unacceptable about ourselves. Our anger, our envy, our shame, our hunger for power, our capacity for cruelty. These things don't vanish when we refuse to look at them. They go underground. And then, and this is the mechanism that makes manipulation possible, we project them outward. We see in other people what we cannot see in ourselves. Now, a skilled manipulator understands this instinctively. They may not have read Jung, they may not be able to name the mechanism, but they feel it. They sense the places where your shadow lives, your buried shame, your unacknowledged fears, your desperate need to see yourself as good, and they use those places as leverage. Here is how it looks in practice. The manipulator positions themselves as the embodiment of everything you secretly fear you are not. They are confident where you are uncertain. They are morally pure, whereas you carry private guilt. They are chosen where you feel ordinary. And in that positioning, they trigger something profound in your unconscious, a kind of gravitational pull toward them, not because they are actually what they appear to be, but because they are reflecting your own unlived potential back at you, in a form designed to make you dependent on their approval to access it. Jung called this projection. And the antidote, the only real antidote, is withdrawing the projection. Learning to see that the qualities you are magnetically drawn to in another person may, in fact, be qualities that belong to you, that are trying to emerge through you, and that no external figure has the right to hold them hostage. When you recognize this, the manipulator loses their most powerful tool. The second mechanism is what Jung called Anima and Animus possession. Remember, the Anima is the inner feminine principle in men, carrying feeling, receptivity, relatedness. The Animus is the inner masculine principle in women, carrying will, direction, and the authority of one's own convictions. In a psychologically healthy person, these inner figures are integrated. They inform the individual without controlling them. But when they are not integrated, when a person has not done the inner work of meeting their own anima or animus, they become extraordinarily vulnerable to a particular kind of manipulation. They begin to externalize these figures. They look for them in the world. They find them, or think they find them, in charismatic leaders, romantic partners, spiritual authorities, visionary teachers. And when they find someone who seems to embody what their own inner figure promises, wholeness, direction, depth, transcendence, the psychological bonding that follows is not ordinary admiration. It is something far more consuming. It is an archetypal possession by proxy. The manipulator, consciously or not, steps into the role of your inner god or goddess. They speak the language of your unlived depth. They feel like destiny, like the answer to a prayer you've been offering your whole life. And in that state, Jung was very precise about this. Rational discernment becomes nearly impossible. Because you are not dealing with another person anymore. You are dealing with a projection of your own psyche. You are, in a very real sense, in love with yourself, with the self you haven't yet become, and the manipulator has positioned themselves as the only door through which that self can walk. This is how cults are built. This is how abusive relationships sustain themselves long past all rational explanation. This is how intelligent, perceptive, spiritually serious people find themselves doing things they never imagined they would do, because they have outsourced the authority of their own inner life to someone else. The reclamation of that authority is the most important spiritual act you will ever perform. Now, let's talk about the trickster, because this archetype lives at the very center of sophisticated manipulation. The trickster is one of the oldest and most universal figures in human mythology. You find him in Norse mythology as Loki, in West African tradition as Anansi, in Native American cosmology as Coyote. In every culture, every era, every corner of the human story, the trickster appears shape-shifting, boundary-crossing, saying one thing while doing another, using truth as a vehicle for deception, and deception as a vehicle for unexpected revelation. Jung understood the trickster not as simply a villain, but as an archetype of transformation through disruption. In its healthy expression, the trickster challenges rigid thinking, breaks false certainties, and liberates what has become too fixed. In its shadow expression, and this is where manipulation lives, the trickster becomes the face of someone who uses the language of truth to serve the agenda of control. The trickster manipulator does not lie crudely. That would be too easy to detect. They lie elegantly. They mix truth and distortion so skillfully that you cannot easily separate one from the other. They say partially right things, things that resonate with your genuine intuition, and embed within them premises that quietly serve their own agenda. They speak the language of liberation while engineering your dependence. They talk about your sovereignty while systematically dismantling your sense of your own judgment. They invoke God, or love, or spiritual growth, or the greater good, and in the same breath, They make you feel that questioning them is a sign of your own spiritual immaturity. This is the trickster in shadow. And the tell, the one consistent, unmistakable tell, is this: genuine wisdom always increases your capacity to think for yourself. Manipulation always decreases it. If an encounter with a person, a teaching, a group, a relationship consistently leaves you feeling more confused about your own perceptions, more dependent on an external authority to interpret your reality, that is not illumination. That is contamination. So how do we develop what the title of this video calls spiritual discernment? Jung's answer was not to become suspicious of everyone. It was not to close yourself off from teachers, communities, or love. His answer was individuation, the ongoing, rigorous, courageous work of knowing yourself so thoroughly that you become increasingly difficult to manipulate. Because here is the truth: manipulation does not create vulnerabilities in you. It finds the ones that already exist. It moves through the gaps, the unexamined wounds, the unlived longings, the shadow you haven't yet faced. And the more of your own psyche you have brought into conscious awareness, the fewer gaps there are for the manipulation to move through. This is why self-knowledge is not vanity. It is not navel-gazing. It is spiritual armor. Jung identified several specific inner conditions that make a person susceptible to manipulation. A desperate need for belonging, an unintegrated need for meaning and transcendence, a deep, unacknowledged hunger for parental approval, often transferred onto authority figures, a poorly developed relationship with the Anima or Animus, leading to the externalization of inner wholeness, and perhaps most critically, an underdeveloped shadow awareness, meaning a person who has never genuinely reckoned with their own capacity for self-deception. The person who believes they are incapable of being deceived is precisely the person most vulnerable to deception, because their confidence in their own discernment is itself a form of inflation, a persona defending itself against the uncomfortable reality that the shadow exists and that it can be exploited. Real discernment begins with humility, with the willingness to say, I have blind spots. My wounds make me want things. My needs can be used against me, and I am going to know them so well that no one else can use them more skillfully than I can see them. There are questions, Jungian questions, that I want to leave you with. Questions to ask yourself when you are in the presence of any person or system that is asking for your trust, your loyalty, your devotion. Does this relationship or teaching increase my access to my own inner authority, or does it make me progressively more dependent on an external one? Do I feel more like myself after engaging with this person or community, or less? Am I allowed to disagree, to question, to doubt, and remain fully welcomed? Or does my belonging feel contingent on my compliance? Does the love I receive here feel unconditional, or does it fluctuate in direct proportion to how well I serve the needs of the system? And perhaps the most penetrating question of all, one Jung would have asked in the consulting room: what need inside me wants this to be real so badly that I might be willing to overlook what I already know? That question is not comfortable, but it is the beginning of genuine discernment. And genuine discernment is the beginning of genuine freedom. Your psyche is not a passive receiver of other people's agendas. It is a living, sovereign, extraordinarily complex territory, and it belongs to you. The work of individuation, the work of shadow integration, the work of reclaiming your projected anima or animus, all of it is pointing toward the same destination, a self that is so rooted in its own depths that manipulation simply has nowhere to land. That is the empire Jung was pointing toward. Not an empire of dominance, not an empire of pride, an empire of self-possession, of inner sovereignty. of a life lived from the inside out rather than the outside in. That is what we are building here, together. If this spoke to something real in you, if it gave you language for something you've been sensing but couldn't name, then you are home. Subscribe to Empire of the Mind. Join a community that takes the inner life seriously, that believes self-knowledge is the most radical act available to a human being. Every video we put out is designed to do one thing: make you harder to manipulate and more fully yourself. Subscribe. Share this with someone who is in the middle of something they can't quite see clearly yet, because sometimes the most important thing one human being can do for another is hand them a mirror. The empire we are building is not out there. It has always been in here. And no one can take it from you once you've truly claimed it.